Hi, super my sea sugar. This is the first of my 3 videos on the Grinch. So this first video will be showing you how I made this cake. It is not a large cake. The reason being is my family actually doesn't really eat cake. So rather than me baking something huge and whatever and then throwing it out, I thought I'd just do a smaller one. So it is layered. The cake is layered with buttercream. So you'll see it through the video. The picture is hand painted, and the hat is just made out of sugar paste with some airbrushing. But anyway, please feel free to follow along, like and subscribe, and hopefully you will be able to get to see the cupcakes and the cookies that I will be putting up after this one. Thank you for watching. Okay, so basic butter cake for this particular cake, and it's a recipe I've been using for quite a while. I really like it. It's really stable. It's interesting because I've actually moved to buying organic eggs for all of my cakes, and when I whipped this particular mix up, it was a lot more yellow than usual. So anyway, it's a good thing. Organic eggs are great. So hey, a little bit more yellow, that's I don't see a problem with that. So I decided to fill this cake with multiple layers. I sort of figured the Grinch is a really, really cool, fun Christmas thing, and I wanted it to be so when you cut the cake open, you've got some really awesome layers of red, the creamy colour of the cake, and green. Unfortunately, this cake is actually really quite small, and you'll see later on that the more I layer it, the more it becomes a little bit unstable. But look, I covered it in chocolate ganache, and chocolate ganache fixes everything. It's the best thing ever. So so basically, I've just cut it up here. The recipe that I use for the buttercream here is Italian meringue. I've tried a number of different recipes over the years, but I find this one works really well for me. And again, I suppose it probably depends on where you live and humidity and that sort of thing. But this is the one where you sort of boil your sugar and water until you reach 240 degrees Fahrenheit. And I've used 6 eggs for this particular one, egg whites. You whip it up. You gradually put in your sugar syrup, and then you add your butter after that. Now, if you're in Australia, our butter is quite yellow, so I had to try and find Danish butter because it's a little bit lighter and it whips up to a nicer or more white buttercream. Okay, so with the chocolate ganache itself is a really basic recipe. It's just chocolate and cream. When I first started making chocolate ganache, I was really worried because I thought, oh, this is going to be some fancy recipe. I'm not going to get it right. And the first few times I made it, it probably wasn't the best, and it turned out that I actually wasn't putting enough cream in it. So I heat the chocolate so it just basically melts, but it's not overly runny. So just to where the chocolate itself has melted, but you could still whip it. There's still a few lumps in it, and you can whip it till it's smooth. After that, I put in my cream. Now, if you don't put in enough cream, it's crumbly. So if you put in a little bit more cream, you'll see it starts to get a really glossy look. So what I've done here, I've just poured it over the top. As you can see, I've been working on it. The one really good thing with chocolate ganache is I always heat up my ruler. So this is the last step. So I've covered the cake, got it so it's looking pretty cool, happy with it, really smooth. And I now will heat up my ruler so it's nice and warm, and smooth it around the sides of the cake, and it'll give you a really, really cool sharp edge. Once I've done that, and I've got it all looking pretty nice, I do the same thing with the top edge here. With this particular one, because the cake was a little bit wobbly, I decided that I did want to make sure that the bottom was also smooth, and you'll see in a minute that I turn this upside down. Here we go. So turning it upside down, and I'll take my ruler and I do exactly the same thing. So heat the ruler up, smooth it around, and you'll see it actually does just take off that excess chocolate that you've got. So now what we're doing is we're putting the board on the cake. Now I iced this board a few days prior to this, so the board icing was dry, and I've just used a bit of white chocolate. Normally I use dark chocolate, but I ran out of dark chocolate, so I use white chocolate to stick my cake to the board. But as I said, the board has an imprint in it, and I did do it a couple of days prior, so it was really, really nice and dry. My fondant, I use Bakel's Pet Nice. Obviously, that's an Australian brand. I'm not too sure what you could have overseas, but perhaps Sugar Flare, or there's a number of different varieties. But typically roll it out till it's about an inch thick. I'm just using a little bit of water here. The only thing you do need to watch with this is that you don't drip it on your board, but you could use egg white or some sugar syrup to dampen your chocolate ganache. So I rolled out my icing. I didn't roll it quite as much as I would do normally, but as you can see, it sort of doesn't end up making a lot of difference. So it does stretch a fair bit, and I just move and mold it down the side of the cake here. Got to be really careful that you don't get creases in it. If you do, you can get it out, but typically I do try and pull it. If you are in a really humid environment or you've got warm hands, you might find this a little tricky. So probably try and keep the houses sort of around room temperature, probably 20 to 22 or 3 degrees works well. It's interesting actually, when I started making cakes, many years ago, it used to be always traditional fruit cake that you would actually cover in marzipan. So now a lot of the work that is done in the chocolate ganache, and the more work you do to the ganache, the smoother you get it, the smoother you'll find that the outside fondant will be. Now you can make ganache if you put in too much cream, you'll find it will be a little too soft, but I tend to do a 1/3 cream to 2/3 chocolate, and that actually gives me quite a firm ganache. So if I can physically pick up the cake just with my fingers around the ganache and I won't dent it. So that's sort of what you need in order to cover it with fondant and not to be too soft. So I've iced the cake now, and I'm not going to be too fast. If you want a cake that is a square edged top, then typically I would have turned it upside down again and smoothed the top that way. But you could see there what I was doing was just rubbing the fondant out towards my smoother. Right, so now we've moved on to doing the painting. I tend to freehand a lot of my pictures on my cakes, but for someone who hasn't done that before, this is a really easy way to actually get an idea of where your picture is going to go on your cake. So I use an iPad and I get it to the size that I want. As you can see, a bit of wax paper over it, and we're not doing a detailed drawing. We're really just getting the rough shape and the rough area and the rough size that we want for the Grinch. So you'll see in a minute, again, nothing detailed. If you feel a bit uncomfortable and you do want to do a slightly more detailed drawing, you can do that, but I certainly don't bother. So you can see I've marked the cake in the background here, and I also have the picture open on my iPhone just as a guide so I can see what I'm painting. With all of my cakes, I use hang on, I'm just trying to remember. I use just food colouring gel. Sugar Flare is quite good, or Wilton. I also paint, depending on what I'm wanting, with Wilton white. The only thing with that is it does tend to have some bleaching effect to your colour. So if you're going to use white on an area you want reasonably coloured, you're better with a white powder and you mix a vodka with that. If you want an area that's a fair bit lighter, you can use the Wilton white, but as I said, it does have a little bit of a bleaching effect. So what we're doing here is just really doing the outline. With all of my paintings, I really just go through and get the rough colors that I'm wanting in the areas that I'm wanting, and then I refine them later on. I use quite a small brush. In fact, I've used 2 or 3 brushes, a small liner, something a little bit wider, and you'll see later on one that's sort of more of it has just a few very thin edges on it, and that's really, really cool for doing his fur and what have you. But anyway, I'll show you in a minute. So with the colors, again, pay really good attention to the picture that you're following. Sorry. And you'll see that his nose is lighter and the greener areas are around the outside. So basically all I'm doing at the moment is just getting the rough colors I want, and I'm blending. Oh, sorry about that. So I'm using a Wilton black here. Sorry, it's a sugar flare black. And just highlighting the area around his eyes and around where his eyebrows are, which are quite bushy. So now with the eyes, I tend to do the outside first and just get sort of the blue colours. Like he's got quite blue eyes, so just sort of the blue, and I just build up layer over layer until I get the actual tones that I want. And in a minute, okay, so you can just see I'm still working on that. I wasn't quite happy with the outside of the eye. It wasn't white enough, so I've just taken a little bit of my Wilton white and just highlighting the eye here. And again, a little bit more of the white just for around the outside, and just tidying up the areas that are a little bit uneven and that I've accidentally painted over. Yep, so just continuing to work on that. Now, again, pay good attention to your picture, but the one really good thing about painting is you can always change it or you can add to it, so don't be scared to give it a go. And it's easier to add colour as you go, so always start off a little bit lighter. Now if you have an area where it is white, you need to paint in reverse. If you're painting, let's say an oil painting for example, you can add white over a colour, but you can't do that on a cake. So I typically leave the areas I want white and I paint around them. So now the Grinch actually has some lighter areas above his eyes, and you can see that I did paint some Wilton white there and I blended it in. What we're doing now is just highlighting above his eyes, and we're going to be giving him his eyebrows and the darker shading around the outside. Now his eyes are actually a little too big, so you'll see in a minute that I do go through and refine them. Yeah, here. So we're just a little bit more toning around the outside and just shrinking the eye area there a little bit. So I've used 2 greens for the Grinch. I've used an electric green and a leaf green. He's quite vibrant in colour, so, and I've actually more or less copied the Grinch cartoon rather than the Jim Carrey one or the actual original Dr. Seuss. So a little bit more shading. As I said before, and you can't see it here, but you'll see in some of my other videos, I do use a really quick sort of evaporating vodka that sort of helps leave the color leaves the color on the surface of the cake. What I found when I first started painting, which was really interesting, is I actually used to mix the food color with water, and then I'd go back the next day and have a look at my color, and my color was like, had disappeared. And you know, that was really devastating, particularly when you spend so long painting. So what was happening is the actual icing was absorbing the color with the water. So if you mix your color with some white powder or the straight color, and you add vodka, it actually dries really quickly and leaves the color on the surface of the cake, and then you'll retain your really vibrant colors. As I said though, if you're going to add Wilton white, and I know I'm repeating myself, but that does have a mild bleaching effect, so make sure you only put that on the areas that you want to be a little bit lighter. So we're just giving him a little bit of his hair or fur or whatever it is that he has. This painting overall took me from start to finish around 2.5 hours. And you really don't need to worry about being overly neat. I mean, he's really furry and hairy, and he's got sort of stuff everywhere, so you don't need to have your sort of like hairs all in the right spot. Like, it really doesn't matter. Just a little bit more colour across the top here. And in fact, what I did when I started painting him, I painted his neck too thick on this, and I just ended up dabbing a little bit of water on some paper towel, and I just wiped it off. So that's a beauty with sort of food colour. You can wipe it. Yeah, here we go. That's just the paintbrush. It's just sort of like I think if I was a technical painter, or you know, painted a lot of oil paintings or what have you, I'd probably know the names of all these brushes, but I don't. So sort of like a grass brush. It's got some really long, thin pieces. Oh, but it's pretty cool for just adding a little bit of extra texture and extra fur. I did go back the next day and put in a little more colour around the outside. I wanted it slightly darker. Okay, so what I'm squishing on the top of the cake here is an LCM bar. And if you're in America, it's Rice Krispies, and I believe you can make them yourself just by buying rice bubbles and adding sugar syrup to it. But I was a little bit lazy and just went and bought some LCM bars. So a reason I've done that is because plonking like a really big, thick piece of fondant on the top of the cake is not so nice to eat, and it's really heavy. And this is a really small cake, so having the LCM bar, which is really light, it just makes it much easier to mould my hat to the top of the cake. Just getting the shape I was wanting. A little bit more fondant around the outside for the white fur. From the $2 shop, you'll see in a minute, I found a really cool brush. It's a really thick bristle brush. It's probably a scrubbing brush, but anyway, it's awesome, and it makes really nice indentations and textures, and it really looks like fur, sort of. But anyway, I liked it. It gives a really nice effect for hats. And you'll see in a minute that I do add a little bit to the end of the hat here. Yeah, I'll just break a bit off in a minute because it's a little bit too long. What I actually don't show you on this is I do colour the board a little bit when I've finished with my hat, and I wanted a little bit of colour around the board, so what I did is actually airbrushed the board slightly, and then I used some paper towel to wipe off the colour. And what that does is, just because I do have a small pattern on the board, it basically just highlighted some of the pattern. So I didn't want too much colour. I don't want to detract from the Grinch. So, oh, there you go. You can see that a little bit of colour, and I ended up taking a little bit more off than what's there. And around the back of the cake, I wanted some, look, you can put anything you want on that. You can put confetti, you can put whatever you would like, draw patterns, it doesn't matter. But I just wanted some bubbles or some baubles, actually. So I just used a small mat, and I just airbrushed the holes. So you'll probably, I'll see if I show you in a minute. And again, just some red and black texture. It just creates more of a 3D effect on the hat. So again, you don't need to have any particular skills in airbrushing. Alright guys, that's about it. Thank you for watching. I have 2 more videos following this, some cupcakes and some cookies. So please feel free to like and subscribe. Thank you very much.